Welcome, you're on The Fringe Show. I'm your host, Tatiana Zalan, and I go live every Friday at 2 p.m. Dubai time. The Fringe helps you to navigate the rapidly changing world and increase the odds of your success. Here we discuss technologies, startups, and mental models of successful people so that you too can take advantage of the opportunities in the new digital world. I'm sure you would have heard the buzzword smart cities. And on my show, I very often talk about various fads and fashions. And today I've decided to talk about, well, one of those words, smart cities. We're going to see why smart cities aren't so smart and what we need instead. Smart cities emerged as an answer to all these growing problems of unsustainable urban expansion, and that there's no doubt about it, plus inequality, climate change, and insecurity. But these smart cities also pose non-trivial challenges like privacy and ownership of data, security, and vulnerabilities. As we're transitioning into a new socio-economic order, what are the alternatives to smart cities? And this is what we're going to talk about today. A usual disclaimer today, what the views that I express here in this video are my own, and they do not represent the official views of any organizations or employers I'm associated with. Let's start with the WEF, the World Economic Forum. Ever heard of them? I'm sure you did. The Davos meeting, the usual meeting, annual meeting, just finished. It was from 22nd to 26th of May, so really just finished in Davos. They discussed smart cities there as well. They're saying that cities are facing urgent challenges because, of course, from COVID-19 and other major disruptions. WEF expects them and highlights that they're expected to culminate in a budget crisis. And in the US alone, this crisis could amount to anything like $1 trillion. Cities need data and innovation to become more resilient, responsive, and efficient, they say. But they also highlight that there is no global framework for how they should see these technologies or what kind of data to collect in a way that protects the public interest. So this is why they're coming up with the initiative which is called G20 Global Smart Cities Alliance. And they chose 36 pioneer cities that will kickstart the roadmap. They will collaborate with global experts to enhance city policies. And some of these cities, there are 36 of them, as I said, Barcelona, Bogota, Istanbul, Lisbon, Milan, Moscow, Newcastle, that's in Australia, San Jose and Toronto in Canada. So a big list of cities. But I'm just wondering whether you, the citizens of these cities, were consulted ever whether WEF, which is a supranational non-elected body, should even pilot test in your city. I bet you were. So what is a smart city? Let's have a look at that. And they mean many different things to different people. So it's really not very useful to give any sort of definitions, let alone academic definitions of what a smart city is. But there are a certain, it's a bundle of certain key features that characterize smart cities. Well, firstly, it's a network of sensors that are attached to real-world objects. These objects can be roads and cars, electricity meters, domestic appliances, human medical implants, and these connect these objects to digital networks. And this is what we call the Internet of Things, IoT. That's another buzzword, also known as ubiquitous computing or UbiComp. These IoT networks generate data in large amounts, known colloquially as big data, and analyzed using some form of artificial intelligence. So that's first. The second one is a network of digital communications enabling real-time data streams which can be combined with each other and then can be mined and repurposed. And finally, the third feature is high-capacity cloud-based infrastructure which can support and provide storage for this interconnection of data, applications, things, and people. One of the senior executives at Cisco, and that's a very major provider for smart cities, they're putting it like that. What makes a smart city is that it recognizes the centrality of technology and information to improve its processes. I'm just wondering, where are the people in all these formulations? Okay, let's talk about the positives. What are really the positives of the smartness of these cities? What problems do they solve? There's no doubt that the future of cities is very important, and there are more and more people that live in cities rather than rural areas. So these smart cities may offer solutions to some of our worst problems, conserving energy, for example, creating a sustainable environment, maintaining public safety, rescuing young people from depression and loneliness, and reducing road deaths. So that seems to me a pretty good list of things where smart cities could help. And let me just give you an example of one project that was relatively successful in Hammersmith, London. That's a suburb of London. And the project was the Habitat Project. What they decided to do with the help of big data received in real time is to understand who is visiting the suburb, what are the people flows, where are they going, how are they interacting. And what they found out was very interesting and counterintuitive. The suburb is very multicultural with various ethnic and gender groups. And what they found out that these groups do not mix together. So they even came up with the idea that what they're witnessing is temporal segregation, which is, of course, is really hard to see without big data, without streams of data in real time. And this has commercial applications for business owners. For example, they found out that the Arab ethnic community would use the shops and other coffee places and the retail sector generally in the morning, while say the LGBT community would use it in the evening. So clearly very different patterns of usage, and that has implications for business owners, for planning services, deciding what kind of retail shops need to be open, what their working hours should be, and so on and so forth. And that, of course, was possible with big data analysis. What are the kind of the positives? What problems? What are the problems they're solving? I think to go further with that, we need to understand that there are different governance models of smart cities, and generally speaking, one is very much community driven. It's bottom up, and the other one is centrally controlled, top down. So because these distinctions are quite important, let's talk a little bit about them. The community model fosters a sense of togetherness and of various homogeneous groups of people who share key aspects of their lives, of their experiences. And this bottom-up model upholds ideals of neighboring, being close together, localness, simplicity as well, and really empowers citizens to build various alternative infrastructures for sensing and controlling their physical realms. Just a couple of examples of such projects. One was the so-called Digital Mile, which is a center for art and technology in Zaragoza, Spain. And this center is the focal point of literally an open source city where designers and citizens can come in and co-create urban improvements, from all sorts of interactive sculptures to new public services. Another one is MAP Kibera, which is an open source community in Kenya, that decided to engage in this mapping effort and create a digital map of the slum of some 250,000 people. The developers documented the physical structure of the community, the local assets. They used community volunteers, GPS mapping, of course, a digital cartographic toolkit, data repository. All the toolkit was there. And so the resulted base map was a platform for innovative community media and information services. And it was a way of also of integrating community into urban planning process, which was really important. This model is very different from the top-down system, which is deployed by ICT giants such as Siemens, General Electric, and IBM. So what's the top-down governance of smart cities? They're coordinated from the top through a highly centralized office supported by technologies of large IT firms. This arrangement enables access to public funding for ICT projects, which is, I think, why they're so popular, probably more popular than the first type. For urban managers, the top-down model provides kind of abundant, systematic, relatively cheap data about city activities and processes, which they then can use in their decision making. The goals here is it's top-down, it's corporate, industrial city model, and it seeks to maximize efficiency, security, and state control, of course. Compare it to the bottom-up model, which promotes sociability, transparency, and entertainment. This top-down city, smart city project typically consists of a triple helix of governments, universities, and industry. Some of you might have heard this expression, triple helix. Clearly, as you can see, there is no role of citizens there. They totally ignore it as equally important agents and inputs into the process. So what are some of the sort of challenges and some issues with smart cities? And we'll start on the governance side. There are also technical issues, but I think the governance issues are far, far more important. Smart cities are largely driven by private sector actors. This is Microsoft and IBM and Cisco, and they facilitate, yes, true, but they also try to shape the data collection and analysis. And this potential misalignment of interest between public actors and private technology companies raises interesting questions regarding the potential misuse of the data collected about citizens and the adequate pursuit of public good, because it's not the job of private companies to pursue public good. It's really the job of the governments. Then there is a risk of corporate capture of public power. There is significant risk that private companies will shape the way in which public policies employ, or rather public bodies employ technology to pursue this public good. So the question is, well, who retains control and responsibility for outcomes? And if we rely on this hybrid governance, that is extensive public-private networks, more and more, then that will raise additional concerns about the accountability of data custodians and the unwarranted delegation of public tasks to private actors. The legitimacy of smart cities is really highly dependent on the ability to remain transparent and accountable to citizens, despite their reliance on data-driven mechanisms. So these technologies may create really massive power asymmetries between us, the citizens, but also in favor really of governments and companies. In smart cities, it's quite clear that what we're seeing is a marketization of public services by private companies behind all this technology. And that technology tends to convert citizens into clients and customers. And they're very open about it. This is, in fact, how they call us. So that's the governance problems, but then there are all sorts of issues with privacy and ownership of data. Smart cities combine these three greatest current threats to personal privacy, and regulation has not dealt with it effectively at all. We're talking here about things like the Internet of Things, ubiquitous computing, big data, and the cloud, and of course, artificial intelligence. A key issue here is a lack of opportunity to give meaningful consent to process personal data. We can't give this consent really. When we choose to interact with an online entertainment provider or social networks or a shopping site or a search engine, we do have options. We can choose between things. But with urban residents in smart cities have very few alternatives to the government operated sensors, surveillance technologies, because you will only have one grid and probably one subway system. Even where data is generated with anonymity, say you're talking about data collected on footfall in public squares, it's relatively easy, as every cybersecurity expert will tell you, to associate two large databases, one, say, footfall database and CCTV database, and you can identify persons. Data ownership is, however, even more important than the issue of data privacy. Do you own a smart car, maybe, or do you aspire to own a smart car? Well, do you know who owns your smart car data? Well, you may be surprised to learn that current legal frameworks suggest that all smart car data collected about the consumer, that is you, your location, your driving behavior, your vehicle, are essentially owned by the smart car company. So if governments, if municipalities, if us consumers, or maybe other users want to use these smart car data, then all of these actors will need to somehow negotiate with the industry, with the smart car industry. And that's, of course, can be a problem. Then there are all sorts of security and vulnerabilities issues, and I go into all of them because there is a very, very long list of them. The list is as long as my arm. Let me just mention maybe IoT. IoT are very insecure. All these connected car, autonomous vehicles, really significant IoT use case. Vulnerabilities to outsider hacking has already been demonstrated. I remember there was an article in Wired in maybe it was in 2015 or thereabouts, where they wrote about how Jeep Cherokees were hijacked on the road. Imagine how dangerous it is. So IoT devices are usually small, they're very cheap, without independent power sources. They're produced in millions. They're not designed for consumer use. Historically, they're designed for industrial use. They're routinely designed with very poor encryption and a lack of other security features. So using them is really problematic. Let me give you an example of a very highly publicized project that was the so-called Sidewalk Toronto project. Remember, Toronto is one of those smart cities. And no company is more ambitious about participating in smart cities infrastructure than Google. So in October 2017, Google affiliate Sidewalk Labs embarked on the first prototype smart city in Toronto, and that was in collaboration with the Public Development Authority, Waterfront Toronto. Together, these project partners were planning a new kind of data-driven urban environment, an urban environment that was designed sort of from the internet up. This is how they used to describe it. The world's first neighborhood built from the internet up. What transpired very, very quickly, though, that many of the consequential features of the Sidewalk project were unavailable for serious scrutiny. Basic questions about data collection, data control, privacy, competition, procurement, these questions could not be answered. And the net result of that, there was very low confidence in the Sidewalk vision, and it was not clearly compatible with all these democratic processes or public interest that we talk about. This really highlighted the business orientation of the project that from the start failed the test of public administration engaging with the government, and that is us. The technology per se was not the problem. There was not any issues with that. The problem is with governance. And this project is now defunct because of this public resistance. And someone close to the project said, part of the reason why the smart city projects are so dangerous and inequitable is because they're highly profitable. So money comes first. And I think before we go and transition into what are the alternatives to smart cities, are there any? And there are. Well, let's look at the ideology behind smart cities. And the ideology here is neoliberalism. Neoliberalism penetrated not only business, but also governments, and that was fostered by politicians such as Thatcher and Reagan back in the 80s. So it penetrated also urban planning with a proposal of market mechanisms and managerialism as solutions to all urban problems. Neoliberalism says that privatization, linked government, deregulation through the implementation of competitive regimes of resource allocation and performance management are all beneficial for public good. The key idea here is that the government is no longer called upon to govern, command, and control, but rather to steer. The idea behind smart cities solving social problems is not merely a question of developing good policies, but much more a managerial question, according to neoliberalists, of organizing strong collaboration between governments and other stakeholders, mainly the private sector. So the end result is all these fancy business-led tech solutions which are favored over political and long-term urban planning. Remember that urban planning is a long-time project and businesses are unfortunately driven by quarterly capitalism. It's quite telling that the smart city discourse and everybody that talks about it describes citizens, that is us, as consumers and data providers rather than any political actors or agents of any sort. But fortunately, there are alternatives that are emerging, and one of them is the so-called bio-urbanism. So what is a bio-urbanism as an alternative to smart cities? It's an approach to planning which pretty much puts human-centered design, human-oriented design, and cultural sustainability at its very core. They see urban environments as a communication system in physical, sensorial, psychological, and biological forms. So it's not only architects who are engaging with this, but it's also psychologists, sociologists, and so on. There are multiple experiments, multiple studies that show us, for example, in hospitals, people recover a lot better in rooms that have overlooking trees. There is a great example of a hospital that was designed in Oregon. It's pretty large. It's 13,000, I believe, square meters. And it's really designed to heal, a garden designed to heal with lots of alleys, lots of variety in vegetation. And people, including in wheelchairs, can freely move there and they can have conversations and so on. A very pleasant and appealing place. And generally speaking, social and mental health deteriorates in nature-less and minimalistic environments, as many studies have demonstrated. So bio-urbanism is just the opposite of what I've just described. The philosophical foundation of bio-urbanism is humanism, and that's a spiritual impulse towards liberation, which emerged in very early Renaissance. Man began to see the world at the time as something to be observed, to be analyzed and changed. And he freed himself from the old world based on authority and organized religion. So biological humanism strives for the maximum integration of the human social world into the overall realm of living world. It's a pretty much organized movement by now. It has its own conferences, its own organization, and I particularly like their manifesto. It's pretty long, so what I'll do, I'll just cite a couple of principles from their manifesto and declaration of their values. They want to promote an environment where culture governs economy and not vice versa. They believe that bio-urbanism promotes cities that are multifunctional, autonomous in supplying energy, food, and fundamental services. It's based on a local circular economy through specifically designed tools. It enhances environmental, social, cultural, and economic sustainability, and it is based on biological dynamics as opposed to technological dynamics. So that's quite a departure from what we've just discussed with smart cities. Robert Minotti is an architect who is a very strong proponent of bio-urbanism. He's also a very famous architect from London, also thought leader and an activist. He's very suspicious of anything smart. You may be very smart and intelligent, but not in a way that helps humanity. And he compares this knowledge in smart cities, which are actually structured around data that is used as a tool of control, and knowledge in bio-urbanism, which is critical thinking. The smart city that they want to impose on us, according to him, does not encourage critical thinking. For example, smart driving cars will do anything for us, and there are many other things they'll do anything for us, and all the thinking, all the driving, all the actions, and so on. So it really encourages passive consumption that is directed by somebody else, but not by the consumer, that is us. So that's one alternative model by urbanism. There is another one which emerged, interestingly enough, in Russia, and it is solving a slightly different problem, and they're trying to solve a demographic problem. Russia has very poor birth rate and population sustainability. The population is not renewing itself, and so this is what it is designed to solve. I am not sure about the exact translation of this model, but it looks like something like low-rise homesteads. So other characteristics are that they're multi-generational, with a substantial land, with obviously a little bit of farming land where you can have your garden, and also maybe not just vegetable garden, but also flowers and etc. It's not kind of not urbanization or anti-tech, but it's definitely anti-big city and probably an anti-smart city. It also relies quite heavily in technological solutions, mainly its ecological sustainability, energy efficiency, use of passive energy, passive architectural design, use of solar and wind, where appropriate, of course, using new building materials, but it's more just than just technology, cloud, and big data. It's really an ecosystem of services, particularly education, healthcare, and transportation. And they have very interesting ideas about transportation. They're not relying on cars, on driving cars at all. It's rather mass aviatization with aviates and helicopters instead of cars. Interestingly, and probably it's a good thing, is that all these technologies already exist. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. Probably it's just a matter of cost and therefore scale. These sort of homesteads, low-rise homesteads, are able to support an average family of about 3-4 children, and that's really important to solve the demographic problem of the developed world. I think this model can work not just in Russia, but in countries like Canada, Australia, that have quite a fair bit of spare land, lots of land available for people, and exactly the same demographic problem as Russia. What they're trying to do also is to put in specific policies in place to ensure affordability of such housing. For example, free housing for very large families. And finally, a couple of thoughts here from me. Okay, so are you excited about living in smart cities? The Atlantic recently wrote that smart is a snazzy political label used by a modern alliance of leftist urbanites and tech industrialists. I don't know whether you agree with that, but it's a good way of thinking about smart cities. A city as a computer, to me, is a very dystopian model. We need not just smart, but really wise technologies. They need to have encoded at a programmable level, at the program level rather, a sort of a moral code, if you will. They also need a feedback mechanisms for us humans who are to run these programs and systems. Technology in itself is neither good or bad. It's really neutral. It's what we as people who are designing it, who are developing it, what we're making of it. It's a tool. My belief is that this one global approach to urban planning under the guise of smart cities will fail. Culturally, institutionally, people are just not going along with this. In some societies, it may well kind of fly. They're prepared for smart cities. If we look at China with its social credit score system and the culture which derives its roots from Confucianism with its losing face, or rather not losing face, and being very conforming to with what other people think or do. Well, maybe in those sorts of places, smart cities are a go. But what about in other places? Will people support the top-down corporate model of cities with its removal of privacy, ownership, and ultimately human rights? I think neoliberalism, with its very short-term business-led tech solutions, where citizens, that is us, our customers, has run its course, and it needs to be replaced with better principles of humanism and human centricity. Ultimately, what I think, and some other analysts think, competing visions of these smart cities are proxies for competing visions of society, and in particular about who holds power in society. And I suggest that it's you and me. There are so many of us, and there are so few of them who govern us. So we need new mental models of the world. These new mental models of how we can go about urban planning are already emerging. I've talked about two. There are probably many more. This brings hope, but perhaps we need even more variety to suit local conditions. And if you know of any of those interesting models, please leave your comments, say something, contact me, let others know. Well, thank you for listening. Thank you for joining. And I hope to see you next Friday at 2 p.m. Dubai time. See you later.